she had fixed the cape, Superman's cape. By the time I had gotten back on Sunday, my wife is amazing. Good morning, Crossroads. This is Chris Baker here with your Wednesday morning wrap up of our new sermon series, This Is Us, and where we talked about our first sermon, we talked about our Christians' unnatural ability to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's truly a superpower that can bring restoration to relationships. But as I got some feedback, it was great. Everybody was super great. But I thought maybe it'd be good to give you kind of an organized kind of argument as why do we submit one to another? Well, the first reason I think is because we're following Christ's example. Look at Christ submitting his will all the time to the Father. Look at him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not my will, but yours be done, God. Look, Jesus could have stayed in heaven, played Xbox, and he would have been totally righteous in doing that. But love compelled him to come first to the earth, and not only just come to the earth and meet with us, but to die for us, truly giving his life for people who didn't deserve it. And that brings us to the second reason. The second reason why we should submit one to another out of reverence for Christ is because unconditional love, real unconditional love, requires submission. Christ loved us while we were still sinners. That's the kind of love he expects us to give others. It's not just about right or wrong or what's fair in a relationship. It's about a higher purpose. We're called to this higher purpose, love. We have to submit our desires, our will, our rights in a relationship and consider the needs and desires of our spouses. The third thing, submission. The reason why we submit out of reverence for Christ is because, look, submission works. In 1 Peter 3, there's this great passage that Peter gives us here about this, kind of talking about submission as a superpower. Watch this. 1 Peter 3:1. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words, but by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence in your lives. Submission draws people together because it draws them to Christ. It's such a beautiful picture. Probably the best picture of this is in the book of Hosea. Hosea was a prophet that God called him to marry a prostitute. God called him to marry a woman named Gomer. And, well, golly, do you think that relationship might have had some issues? Well, it did, and no kidding, for a whole backstory where we don't really understand, but clearly there were reasons in in Gomer's life where she could not feel content with a loving, godly husband, and she leaves Hosea, and she goes and finds. She goes right back to the lifestyle of prostitution. And look at what God says to Hosea. He says, "Go show your love to your wife again. Though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites." See, when we love our wives, when we submit our rights, our will, our desires, we're loving like Christ loved us, and it draws people together because it shows them the love of Christ, but two, that love of Christ, that kindness, that compassion draws them to Christ, and when they're drawn to Christ, Christ brings us closer together. We submit because submission works. And look, I can't promise you that submission is going to heal every heart or is going to heal every relationship. But I can tell you this from the Word of God, that it's that type of love that's God honoring. Okay, look, so this is our Wednesday morning wrap up, and I introduced some new concepts, and it seems like, oh wow, I'm going to have to do a Thursday morning takeaway to explain all the new concepts on the Wednesday morning. Oh my goodness. But here's kind of the main ideas. Ready? Submission is a superpower that draws people together, and we submit. Why? Because we're following Christ's example. We're loving unconditionally. It's not an if-then. It's an act of the will. I'm going to choose to submit my will and consider the desires and needs of my spouse. And we are submitting because it works. It draws people to Christ, and Christ brings people together. Hey, we love you. Have a great week.